Joining me now to discuss this and more, National Affairs Editor at the Daily Telegraph, Sky News host James Morrow, and Deputy Executive Director at the Institute of Public Affairs, Daniel Wild. I'll start with you, James. I know it's only emerging now, this resumption of strikes against Tehran. I guess my issue with the way it's played out today, you know, the comments from the US President that there is now a ceasefire long before the two parties came out and agreed to it. My concern is this seems very, very premature. There's not yet confirmation that those nuclear assets in Tehran and in Iran more broadly have been taken out. And, you know, I know you want to finish these wars quickly or these strikes quickly, but you want to finish them absolutely. You want to win them. You don't just want to get it done quickly. What do you make of this news tonight?
Well, I think that Iran basically asked for Israel to come back and strike back, as it's reportedly done in the last few minutes, with missiles being sent back in Tehran's direction by Israel. Now, this comes after, as you say, this morning, it's been a wild ride today, Pete. In the last, 10, 12 hours, we had Donald Trump with that announcement saying there's peace. We've got peace between Iran and Israel. Both sides are going to accept it after 12 hours, 24 hours. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Well, Iran, as we know, they kept firing missiles until the last minute, and then they went over that, and they hit an apartment block in Beersheba in the south of Israel. 4 people, I think, reportedly died there, which is, of course, a tragedy. But also, it shows that Iran's not serious. But the question, Peter, too, is, you say the parties haven't come out and said they accepted it. We also don't know who in Tehran is able to even accept the deal. We don't know if the Ayatollah Khamenei is alive or dead. We don't know who's actually in charge of things. We don't know what the state of the government is there at this stage. So the question of even who can give the order to cease fire, to stand down, that's an open question, as is, of course, the question about the nuclear material which you raise.
We'll come back to this with Tom Switzer from the Centre for Independent Studies, a bit of a US expert. He'll join me in a moment. But let's go to the domestic fallout for our Prime Minister here in Australia about all of these various issues around his belated response to the US strikes. As we know, nowhere to be seen on Sunday, only out briefly yesterday, pretty much on the back foot again today. Sat down, of course, with Kieran Gilbert, defending not going to NATO and everything else. Have a listen.
Should you have gone to NATO, given he wants to meet with the Indo-Pacific allies?
They're not there, Kieran. The President of Korea is not there. The Prime Minister of Japan is not there. In terms of the IP4, 3 of the 4 leaders aren't there. That was a part of the decision-making process that we made. NATO is about NATO.
Sure, Dan, those neighbours are not there, but everybody else in NATO's around the table. And I think it's less to do about whether he'd be stood up by Donald Trump again, and more about the fact that when he sits around that table and we're 2/5 of bugger all in terms of defence spending, 2.33% of GDP, everybody else is 3% and plus, we look like we're not pulling our weight.
Well, that's right. Unfortunately, Peter, Australia is not taken seriously on the international stage at the moment. And a part of that is, as you correctly identify, we're not putting in our fair share. But another part of it is I think that this government has always had a domestic focus and a domestic lens that it casts over the foreign policy decisions, particularly as it pertains to matters in the Middle East. That's driven by, as you know, the high Islamic vote that Labor gets, and it wants to continue courting that vote. And it's also partly driven by the fact that there's been a long-term hostility among some within Labor towards the United States. That has been heightened with the election of Donald Trump, who many have a personal animosity towards. And the reality is, whether you like Trump or not, he's the president. America is our most important ally. And I think that there's a lot of concerns about how the government, as I say, casts a domestic lens over these important foreign policy decisions. And they seem to not have the ability to put our national interests ahead of their domestic political considerations. And these are the consequences that we're now seeing.
I was a bit cranky with the Prime Minister last night, James, on air, because I thought it was a dereliction of duty that he did not have an NSC on Sunday. He should have called a National Security Committee meeting. He was asked pointedly about the terror threat today. He said it has not changed. And he sort of was a bit glib with his response. I don't think he's across his brief in general terms, particularly in this space. I'm not confident that he's getting the briefings he should. I'm not confident that the experts are meeting with him as regularly as they should. We also know, of course, ASIO and the AFP, which have got carriage of these issues in Australia, well, he punted them out of the NSC in his last term and was only embarrassed and forced to put them back around the table. And I remember last time with Islamic State, as I've already said tonight, there was such a radicalisation of young Australian kids online, playing out as they were watching events in the Middle East. And we look at what's happening overseas. We see in the United States that this is a live issue. We've got experts in Australia warning we are not taking this seriously enough. How confident are you when you look to Canberra?
Not terribly, Peter. And, you know, you bring up the NSC, and this is not the first time we've had these issues around this. I mean, I recall after the October 7th attacks on Israel by Hamas, there was a great question about whether or not the Prime Minister had even bothered to call the NSC together during that international crisis. So, you know, I think there's a real pattern we can see here of this government being really passive. And frankly, when it comes to this sort of national security stuff, and whether it's, you know, the United States and China, whether it's this, Iran, whatever, there's a passivity. And the general sense I get, yes, you know, what you guys have been saying is right. You know, there's sort of a distaste for Donald Trump and the United States and this progressive patriotism, which requires opposition to the United States to define itself. But there's also, I think, a real wish when it comes to foreign policy and the concerns of foreign policy and national security that it would just all go away. That's the sense I always get from Anthony Albanese whenever he's asked about these sort of critical foreign policy matters, is that he just thinks this is just too much, too complicated. It doesn't impact the domestic business, which he's sort of interested in, I guess, when it comes to Australia. And that's about, you know, constituencies and votes and spending our money and, you know, building that sort of, you know, reorientated society that he wants to do. He finds the foreign policy stuff, the security stuff, a huge distraction. And I don't think we are very well served by this government at all when it comes to it.